The team, everybody's giving me water and setting me up with microphones. So, all right, now I promised I would speak loud enough so that everybody could hear me. If anybody has a hard time hearing what I share, then please stop me. I'm fine with that. On a human level, my wife and I have 4 children, and in fact, we were just coming back from a vacation. I haven't been home for 2 weeks, but tonight I get home, so I'm very happy about that, and I will be leaving on time. But I am really glad to be here with you, and I want to give a shout out to Jason. Jason Giorgio in the back, I believe, will be doing a breakout with you. And he had reached out and said, you got to see what's going on here with Christina and what they're doing together in this program and how different it is. And I'm impressed. And, I don't have, in my world, I don't see a lot of this type of connection with people and I relate to everything I was hearing said about what you guys are doing here. So it's really hats off to you. I'm in study groups with people who technically would be my competitors, but it's that issue of finding people that you just connect with, that you can be completely open about everything. And so we were just actually out in the Caribbean together with people that ran firms that compete with mine in the nation. And we all go as CEOs, and we share ideas, because ultimately, at the end of the day, we are in the same pursuit as everybody we serve, which is to take our business and make it work for us so we can live a good life for the rest of our lives. And I heard a couple things over there as I was sitting here. One of the things I heard you sharing was this idea of what it means to have a good life. And a big part of what I'm going to share with you tonight, or this afternoon, especially this notion of retirement. So you'll see the sufficiency curve here. I'm going to talk to you about some important work that we're involved in and being sponsored for through American College and some other organizations. And this particular conversation is in contrast to, if you have a background in Capital at Work or the Trinity Study or any of the Monte Carlo work that goes on in the investment community, I'm going to share where it's not necessarily throwing that stuff out, but it's really bringing some contrast to how it's applicable to us and giving you some hope about Capital at Work, because actually Capital at Work served the markets better than it served the people in them. And we're going to talk about that a little bit. So I'm going to have to jam through a fair amount of material. As a business owner, I know most of you are business owners, and I will tell you that I'm going to take what is personal on the sufficiency curve conversation. That is true for everyone. And I'm going to talk to you about how to improve your odds and increase the transition from a business owner to a personal balance sheet, and how to position it in such a way to take money off of your business balance sheet and move it to your personal balance sheet so that you can live a good life the rest of your life. At Pacific Advisors, Jason and I are in California. We work closely with John McGurran. John has been one of my best friends, and he's one of the people that would also technically have a firm that would be a competitor, but we don't see each other that way. We've all been good friends, and we share every idea. Because at the end of the day, it's how do all of us as business owners translate that. Like, we didn't grow up to live in a business. We grow up to live a good life, and we happen to get into business to help us do that. So we're going to keep those priorities straight and hopefully take away some good learning today. Please feel free if along the way something's not clear, because it's not clear to you, it won't be clear to somebody else, okay? So first off, strategic priorities for business success, a good life for the rest of your life. Now, I don't mean the Western notion of a good life. I mean, let's start with an assumption that wherever your life is right now, or whatever you're doing to change your life, you are where you are, and incremental improvement in the quality of life has a certain pleasure to it, but it actually does not have as a proportionate amount of pleasure and improvement as loss has a effect on our happiness. You go backward, you get ill, or you go bankrupt, or you go through a divorce, and that has more impact to the negative than any incremental improvement could have to the positive. And in fact, we get we take for granted very quickly any incremental improvement. We take it off the table, we say, that's all right, that's how I like to live, and we move on to the next incremental improvement. And the place that's happening all over the nation, and by the way, this is happening everywhere. So if you know what CFAs are, certified financial analysts, in their journals, all over the media and in the trade industry of financial services, and we manage a lot of money at our firm too, but in the trade industry, there is a question that's now showing up everywhere. Did Monte Carlo fail us? Did Capital at Work fail us? This is showing up right now in the headlines of every major side of our industry, and there's a really good reason for it. Less than 5% of people that are hitting the age they thought they would be financially sufficient are actually able to hold on to their current lifestyle. So they've created language to make it okay. They're downsizing, they're right-sizing, they didn't need that much anyway, all of those conversations. And in fact, the thing that's unusual about that is there's a whole bunch of people sharing that language, but the ones who made it don't say that. They don't right-size, they keep their house. They stay where they are, they bring their kids back and have fun and have reunions and they travel together, but they don't necessarily start changing everything when they retire if they know they're okay. So how do you know if you're okay? And this is a really big problem. And it is a constant subject right now in the Wall Street Journal and New York Times. If you've ever heard of the 4% rule, the 4% rule is not new. It's been around for quite a while. But it is a story about what it means to have enough capital to live a good life for the rest of your life. It's a story that is broken. And it came because of the fact that it got anchored in academia. And I'm going to share some of that a little bit and what we're doing to solve that. So, the sufficiency curve is our firm's conversation for this, but really this is a fact. And let me just talk to you a little bit about this for a second. My firm has 45,000, just under 45,000 clients. We manage a fair amount of money, and I don't take personal clients anymore. I run the firm. But over the years, when somebody has a really challenging case, like how do we help this family or help this couple, they'll ask me to sit into the meeting for the sake of some strategy and some of the estate work and things like that I still work on. Otherwise, it's guys like Jason who take the lead on that. Over and over, we kept seeing people coming in, oddly enough, a lot of them from the medical community, because as the way their world grew, they sacrifice, and when they finally start to make the money, then they finally reward, and their lifestyle grows, and all of a sudden they cannot possibly sustain it. And so they get to something like a retirement date where they're done working at a particular place, and they come in and they go, so do I have enough? Am I okay? That's a really pressured moment for a professional in our industry to have to come up with some kind of science in a computer and say, yes, you are, or no, you're not. And that has built a lot of frustration for folks. And I'll give you an example. If I walked into somebody's office today and they used one of the models that uses Capital at Work, and almost every model has that, and the reason is because the Trinity study came out years ago and helped everybody have a framework to do planning with. As a result, we assumed an average rate of return of 8% and a 3% inflation and a 4% distribution rate. And those things became part of everybody's software. And here's the problem with it. If you're making $200,000 a year, you think you need $5 million capital at work. Now, if I have a couple sitting in front of me and they want to know whether or not they have enough money, I could do that math in my head. However, let's change the facts just for a minute. And you'll start to see why that system's broken. If I walked into your office and you're the professional today and I say, look, I've got a $200,000 lifestyle and I've got $2 million, do I have enough money to live? Based on a Trinity study model, based on Capital at Work modeling, the answer is no, I do not. However, if then you found out, then maybe I asked you that over the telephone, but then when I walk in, clearly, I am 95 years old, and I have $2 million capital, and I need $200,000 a year. Do I have a chance now? I may make it, right? And so, oddly enough, you know that instinctually when you see the facts. You know it, but the model doesn't take it into consideration. Well, that model's broken, and we're going to talk a lot about that. So, I'm going to jam through this. These are nested balance sheets we're going to talk about. If you're a business owner, you're very organized around a business balance sheet, cash flow statements, P&Ls. You're very organized around them if you are, because that's how you stay in business, is by being organized around them, right? What we're not as used to is keeping track on a personal level. We sort of keep an investment account, but then we know we have some real estate. Maybe there's a value of your company. How do you know the value of your company? Do you track the value of your company on a regular basis? So we're going to talk about that a little bit. And then how do you create and build more value into your company? And how do you capture and redirect any inefficiency that we can capture, right? So we got a busy agenda here. Ultimately, when I do seminars for CEOs, like with anybody here ever been a part of Vistage or something like that? YPO, Vistage, places like that. So I do a lot of speaking for those kinds of organizations. There's always 15 or so CEOs around a board table. They ask me to come in, and I get 3 hours with them. And we go through their balance sheets and their cash flow statements, and we find inefficiencies. Things that they could have known, should have known, doesn't matter. There's no right or wrong to it. It's just that there's just not enough time to run your business and be an expert about that too. So that's what we focus on. And my big question is, how do we take your business from being something that generates income for you and turn it into a surplus asset? So what does that mean? If sufficiency is having enough capital to live a good life for the rest of your life, and whatever your good life is the life you're living at that time. In other words, I don't want to see it go backward, since that is the trend. Over 95% of Americans hitting the age where they think they're supposed to be okay for the rest of their life cannot keep their lifestyle. My first objective then is to make sure they can keep the lifestyle they find themselves in that moment. However good or bad you decide that is, it is a starting point. And then if you're going to incrementally improve, you need to know the cost to your sufficiency curve. But more importantly then, how do I get my business into a place where it is a surplus asset? Meaning, I could sell it or not, and it does not change whether or not I can have a good life the rest of my life. Okay? All right. All right, so starting with today's lifestyle, enough versus more. One of the challenges of our culture is there's almost an anti-goal establishment because a goal that's reasonable sounds too limiting. And so what ends up happening is more is always the answer. Well, what are you trying to achieve? Well, more than I currently have. And more is a trap. By the way, more is not a strategic objective. You can't define it or declare success, right? So more is not the answer. In fact, it keeps you on a treadmill. And it causes you to make some vital mistakes, like chasing rate of return. Chasing rate of return is an idea that somehow I've got this lottery game out here that I'm playing in the stock market, and if I do it just right, maybe I end up having a better life and I get a better rate of return than somebody else did. Now, you do realize you had a better chance of that in the 30s than you do today. The reason is because back then, even the professional didn't have any better tool than you. They just had more time. But today, the professionals have a lot more tools than you, and they have all the help in the world to make sure they have predictive analytics, and they can't get it right. The likelihood that we as consumers can get that right and beat them is really silly. So chasing rate of return is a failed idea, all right? So we're going to do a little bit more around that. Without unacceptable compromises in your lifestyle. That's something that some of you that took time with Toby learned, right, at the AJI program. So we'll talk a little bit about the confidence of sustainability. So how much is enough? And we know, let me get here, the how much is enough is the big question. And so I'm going to use, knowing that a lot of you have an AJI background, I'm going to use his story here, 10 million capital at work for a $400,000 income replacement. And does this sound familiar to any of you that went through that training? All right. And you'd look up here at the Trinity study, and you see those are the facts that you're using. In fact, to this day, if you just to be fair to Toby, to this day they still argue about this in the Wall Street Journal and New York Times. Literally last month, articles in both periodicals asking, is 4% the right number in a market like this? It's not the right number. Try it. You can't take all your money and put it into assets that are both inflation hedged and still getting you a 4% distribution rate on fixed income. It's not going to be real easy. So how do you do that? And yet so now they're saying maybe 3.1 is the right number. Do you know what that does to your capital at work requirement? It raises it, right? So, but that's not small, right? It's a 25% shift. Well, that's troublesome. So we'll talk more about that. So let me ask you this. As we look at the way markets perform over time, right, and they grow and they're up and down, you know, when you're down here and you don't have a lot at stake, it is easier to watch it go up and down. But things really change when you have a lot at stake and a lot at stake, right? You cannot afford to go backward. How well do you stay in the posture? Behavioral investing is a huge part of this conversation. It's the reason that so many people will abandon a good strategy in a moment because they get out of check with whatever got them into that strategy because emotionally they cannot stand to watch that money go up and down. Look what happened in the last big crash. People were bailing out of any strategy they had at the worst possible time. And by the way, you heard a whole bunch of other people who didn't panic. You know who didn't panic? The people who had no money. They did not panic at that. Maybe if they lost their job, but they did not panic about what was going on with $2,000 in their IRA. They went, well, that sucks. But somebody's sitting there with $8 million and they thought they were almost there and now it went to $4 million. They panicked. And what did they say? I can't lose any more. And they pulled it out. Brutal, brutal outcomes for folks. And really hard to get back into it, right? So we're going to talk about that a little bit. And we're going to talk about building your sufficiency curve. The good news is whether you're a business owner or not, every single one of you today, right now, has a sufficiency curve. It has to do with how much your capital, or how much your lifestyle requires. I heard earlier that we don't accumulate assets for the sake of assets. I think that you guys were in that conversation a little bit. We accumulate assets for the sake of income. Because it is income that we have to have for the rest of our lives in order to have a good life the rest of our lives. But we just don't know how long that is, right? So we're going to study that a little bit. So let's start. So let's look at our $400,000 a year income requirement from this person. This is very generic because I don't know if we're talking before tax or after tax, and we're just going to leave all of that to the side for a minute. I would say tax, for my easy brain, is another form of consumption. It's just like inflation. It's there, it's erosive, it takes money away from me. So I treat it like consumption. And this is what's fun. Look at this. Now, here's a 30-year-old, and they currently live on $400,000 a year of income. The laser doesn't work unless I point it at all of you. On here, it doesn't work. But down here, I can get it to work here, go there, it doesn't work anymore. It's magic, right? It's because they're videotaping, and they need to make sure this stays compliant, so I can't give you any. All right. So 10 million capital at work. Does it matter if my income is 400,000 from everything you've been trained in? Does it matter if I'm 40, 50, 60, 70 years old? Does that change? No. Not in the capital at work model. But that's ridiculous. I asked you earlier, if I'm 95 years old, maybe it's different for me. And so if that's true, then we start to establish a boundary case, right? We say, well, probably okay for this person, not okay for this person. All right, now we can start to narrow in. Now here's an interesting thing. Even if I have 10 million capital at work, I was in the room after the crash when Toby mentioned that he got to find out what his real wealth was because he watched it go down by 30%. And he had to decide if he was still okay, if you were in that room. And by the way, I learned a lot from Toby, so I'm not dissing the guy. He's smart, right? But I didn't stay there after a certain number of years because I got what I needed out of it, but we never agreed about this. And he asked me to show him this principle, and I did, by the way. And we'll leave it at that. So, I showed him. But sometimes you're so far down a road, it's really painful to think about starting over. But this is incorrect. And I can say that definitively, and I'll say it in another way here in a bit. But this 10 million capital at work, is it still subject to risk? You bet it is. In fact, the minute that your professional puts together an investment portfolio for you, the next thing they have to say, even though there's a lot of conversation around optimal rate of return and asset allocation and modern portfolio theory and all of that, is past performance is no indicator of future results, right? So it's a big crapshoot. We don't know how it's going to go. And that's honest, right? However, what if I now said, listen, I want to take the risk out of this. I want to de-risk it so that I have no volatility. Will that require more or less capital? Instinct says more. And by the way, in a minute, I'm going to show you that's not true. But CPAs and investment professionals and CFAs all tell me yes. The difference is I'm asking about an income, not your capital. So I'm saying, do you need more capital? And you're saying yes, because you're going to take the risk out of it. And taking the risk out requires more capital. So here's what's interesting. When you're talking about where the Trinity study came from, which is academia. What does academia care about when they invest? What are they investing for the sake of? An endowment. How long do they have to live? Endowments. Forever. Any of you going to be doing that? I know you're living longer. I've heard that. Forever might not be in the cards yet, right? So if you're not living forever, it turns out that actuaries have an unusual job. They have to determine when you'll die. And that's awful. And yet it turns out that while they cannot tell you which of you will die when, they will tell you on average everybody dies on time. Okay? So you can tell you've been in an industry too long when the only humor you have is actuary humor, right? So, and of course, coming from New York, I work with a lot of folks in New York, and I have some people that will tell me, while the actuaries will tell you on average how many people will die, the Italian actuaries can tell you who. So here's an interesting thing. I'm going to de-risk this income right now for this younger person. I'm going to de-risk it in today's environment, right now, in this interest rate environment, which is the worst for sufficiency. Okay? I know I said a lot there. What I'm going to show you starts to take the sufficiency model and it applies it during the time that interest rates are really low. When interest rates are low, your sufficiency requirement is high. Now, what does it take to have a lifetime of guaranteed income of the same amount as the capital at work model for this younger person? Where's my little? There it is. $7.9 million. Interesting, we just accomplished the same exact thing. This is just going to the market. Any of the companies that issue guaranteed lifetime income. And I don't care what kind of company. If you can find a corporation that will do it, if you can find an insurance company that'll do it, if a bank will do it, whoever would do it, they have to file because there's rules, but whoever would do it, your brother could make the offer. I don't know if they could do it, but they could make the offer, and you could decide whether or not you like that promise. But this is a contractual promise, and that is full of uncertainty, and that's a bigger number. But, of course, we're talking about a 40-year-old. So, what's the cost of waiting? Will it require more capital or less capital if I don't do this at 40, but now I've got to buy the income at 50? Why is that?
Because now you're going to be, you've taken that breadth of time between 40 and 50 off the table, and so now there's less time needed for the money to pay out for the person who's paying it out.
That's it. See, the insurance companies have had to do this for pensions for a long time. Anybody that does pension work has had to do this math for a long time, which was so surprising to me when I started sharing this with other people more than a decade ago. Even before I was with Toby, I was like, do we understand that pensions deal with this all the time? Social Security is dealing with this all the time. This is called, by the way, for anybody an accountant in the room? Okay. So this is an accrued liability. I remember when the crash was happening, my wife looked at me because we're in that business, and you know, we have savings and we have money in the market. And she looked at me and she's like, are we okay? Now, in that moment, you all had a moment like that. During the crash, everything's crashing. You either looked at someone or somebody looked at you and said, are we okay? And what was the answer that came back? You know what? I don't think so. I bet you turned around and said, we're going to be fine. Why? Because you didn't want to deal with it right then. Right? I did. I went, we're fine. Holy smoke. Right? So, listen, the minute you turned around and said to somebody, we're going to be fine, if I were in a corporate world, we call that an accrued liability. Okay? Right? That means you just made a promise you better be able to back up. We're going to be fine. I don't have that much money right now, but we're going to be fine. Right? And I don't have that much money yet either, but I'm going to get there. And I'm going to get there by saving my money. And you're exactly right. It turns out the reason this is less is because this is an income commitment. How do bonds work? Bonds are an income promise, right? In exchange for capital, right? We give an insurance company or somebody capital, and they give us an income promise. And this is the cost of that promise at that age. And it turns out insurance companies know that on average, everybody dies on time. As a result, this number goes down as I wait. Now, that doesn't mean we shouldn't invest. It means the required capital is getting smaller every year I don't die. Because we are maturing bonds. Make sense? There will come a surrender penalty at some point. But it decreases because somewhere out here everybody passes away. But now I want to point something out to you. There are people all over this nation that are going into someone like me in their office at a wirehouse or somewhere, and they're saying, listen, I'm 60 years old, and I have about $4 million between my house that I was going to sell and my business maybe. I'm not sure how much it's worth, and how do I know if I have enough money in the market? Then they're asking that question. And can you imagine the difference in the answer if I'm sitting here maybe at $4 million and I'm 60 years old? And one person says, you need 10 million for your lifestyle. And I've got 4 and I'm 60. How's that feel? Ugly. Now, if what happens is we recognize this curve has a closure rate, this curve has a closure rate toward us, toward our capital position. And I'll tell you what these numbers mean in a minute. They're very exciting. But our money is growing, at whatever way it's growing. Maybe it's more jagged, but for the sake of this picture, our money is growing, and maybe I'm not going to hit it by the time I'm 60. But the convergence rate might mean that I'm going to hit it at 70. And there's a whole bunch of people that are 65, 67, and they're going, I don't know what I'm going to do. And what they don't know is, first, it's a much lower number to begin with, and second, it's coming to you. Make no big mistakes, and they will converge. This has for those of you that have a background in investments, and I know not a lot of you, but I'm just going to say this, this has a wealth equivalency to you, the fact that that curve is coming toward you. Meaning, every year you don't have to accumulate more capital for has the effect of having accumulated capital. Does that make sense? Yeah. It's like money you didn't lose is money you earned. That's an old adage, right? Penny saved. When I showed this to Toby, and I use him just as a point of reference, and those of you that don't know him, he's a guy that teaches certain things to business owners. It was good. I got a lot out of it. But it was limited. And when we had this conversation, I showed him this diminishing liability curve, and he looked at it and he said, I get it. It's mechanical. It's a principle, but I don't want to start over on this. I said, okay, fair enough. That's a fair answer. I'm not asking anybody, but here's why it matters. Then he said, by the way, if I have to trade capital for lifetime income, that means I lost. That was his perspective. So it's interesting. You see this little number under here? That's the required capital. If I want to give my capital to an insurance company and have a promise that if I don't live long enough to get all the money, they'll give it back to my kids. Why wouldn't those numbers be farther apart then? That's $1 million difference, right? Why wouldn't they be much farther apart if they had to give it all back if they don't have the opportunity to win on it? What would be the reason why? Do you know?
Actuarial charts.
Actuarially, they already know you're going to die on time. That's it. So they go, all right, we'll give a refund if you die. That does cost us something, but it doesn't cost that much, actually. Because on average, you're not going to beat the odds by much, right? So that's the way they look at it. Now, again, in this room, you might be the ones to be on the positive side of the average. And there's a whole bunch of people that are eating terribly and not exercising that are going to be on the worst side of that average. And on average, everybody will die on time. Okay. And they track that stuff really close. All right. So this convergence rate, it's interesting. In this current environment, this convergence rate right here, I'm a pilot, so I use language like that, sorry. So think about being on the freeway or coming to an intersection. 2 cars coming to an intersection and they're both doing 50. The impact is not the same as hitting a wall. It's hitting something else going fast in another direction than the one you're going. So in this case, if I were earning 5% on this, this curve is coming toward me with an equivalent impact of another 5%, and it's not even my capital. So I can be ahead of the game of what everybody thinks is chasing return with no additional risk, just understanding the principle. Does that all make sense? Now, it's interesting. I started teaching this a long time ago, and by the way, this one works for you too, and this is a very big deal. When I get to the surplus side of this line, all those things that were converging toward me work just as hard for me on the other side, and even more so. Meaning if I end up retiring with a little bit more money than I needed, or maybe I'm not living on $400,000, but if I have a little more money than I needed, that money can stay in the market now. And by the way, if all of my income needs are met and the market goes up and down, am I as nervous? If I have no risk of having to sell the house or anything like that, and I can stay where I'm at, I can handle if inflation or a market change creates a sudden move in the market because it didn't affect my life. And I got to tell you, I had so many thank yous from clients who came through that crash and realized that we had put them in places with guarantees, and they were going, oh my gosh, like we have friends that are panicking right now, and we just thought we better call you and say thanks. And not every client listens. Not every client will, but I'm telling you, this is the only number, wherever this blue line is, that is the only number in your world that tells you whether or not you're safe for the rest of your life at your current lifestyle. And you have a lot of control over it, by the way, because it's the one thing you can affect. You cannot likely beat the market at doing the market. What you can do, what do you think would lower this line? In fact, let's get to some of the mechanics. Oh, all right. What would lower this line?
Decrease living.
If you decrease your living expenses, yep. Yeah. Actually, one of the things you can't control that lowers the line is if interest rates go back up. If interest rates go up in the future, this line comes down. If you change your lifestyle, it goes down. Well, if you change it for the better. If you change it, like if you lower your cost of living, you lower your sufficiency curve. If you increase your cost of living, the sufficiency curve rises. And it puts your target farther out. But I'll tell you what, if you knew you were going to cross over at 70 years old, I know a lot of people that are 67 years old that would not mind working a few more years. I heard somebody say, I'm never going to stop working. It gives me purpose. I don't know. Who said that? You did. I feel the same way. So for me, I call it sufficiency because I'm not promising to retire. This industry, I started out in this world with a family that is very poor. Nobody had ever graduated high school. I was a dropout. I went back to school because I found a mentor. And they encouraged me and gave me community and helped me see a better path for myself. And today my parents have a much better life because of the great gifts this industry has given me. And they live just around from my office, and they have a great life. But none of us knew how. We didn't have the knowledge, right? And so I got into this industry because of mentors, and I got to tell you, this particular notion changed my life, but I have no intention of retiring just because we've got enough wealth to. I'm having the best fun of my life right now. When your business is a surplus asset, and you can either keep it or sell it and it actually doesn't make a difference, you get to be in business for all the right reasons. You could decide if the business ever makes me sick, I'm done with it. But if the business is making me happy, I'm in it. That's a good place to be. All right. So, counting your business as an asset for retirement. Almost everybody does. If you're a business owner, you are counting on the fact that your business is some part of that. And what I am here to tell you is that business owners turn out as a class to be worse savers than even the general public, on average. If I take your business and your personal residence off of your balance sheet, you are poorer than, on average, not you necessarily, but on average, business owners are more likely to fail financially if they lost their business and they couldn't count their house as personal wealth. And by the way, you have to live somewhere, so we don't let you count your personal or your house unless you're willing to sell it, and that goes to that downsizing thing. It's what we do if we have failed it, but nevertheless, this is key. So when I look at a business owner, I look at somebody who knows they probably have to sell their company in order to have a good life the rest of their life. And what I'm hoping to do is help every one of my business owners turn their business into a surplus asset. And what I mean by that is this. If this is the line, and they're calling it retirement or whatever that sufficiency date is, when they can cross the line and feel safe, as opposed to the capital at work model, and really what we're trying to do is we're looking at income. Now the red is the consumption rate, and the green is their supposed savings. For the consumer, that looks more consistent because they usually pick some percentage of their pay. and then they let that go to their qualified plan, right? For the business owners, they don't tend to get enough in. How many of you have, if you're business owners, how many of you have qualified plans that you offer your employees? Pretty much everybody generally that's in business? You do. How many of you feel that you can put enough money in that thing to make a difference to your lifestyle as a business owner? Generally, most business owners go, well, I can't put any more money, I'm capped. In fact, if I put a little too much money in, what happens at the end of the year? I get it back. So, and then we have the whole issue that you've just deferred money to whoever happens to be president when you can do nothing about it. You've sold your business, and now you're taking your distributions, and whoever just became president is going to affect whether or not you get taxed at 20%, 30%, 80%, or they just wipe out your Social Security because you are in the 1%. So that's tough. So I'm not a huge fan necessarily of them, but nevertheless, we have a lot of clients in them, so we support them. So when this savings, or when I finally stop though, I don't have the luxury of saving money necessarily anymore. I am in the consumption phase for income. I may be building my assets still because they're still on my balance sheet, but I'm not adding to them, right? Once I stop working, once I stop making income. So where we find most business owners is here, and the thing they are expecting to make the difference is the sale of their company to throw them above the line. So it would seem logical then that you'd have a business that's ready to sell. Here's one of the problems with the business ready to sell. The very best time for your business to sell is when somebody thinks your business is in favor and your sector is in favor, and they come and make an offer to you, except you just don't know which day that's going to be. If, on the other hand, the sale of your business is up to you deciding when is time, business owners are like gamblers. They don't walk away when it's good, and if it's bad, they're like, I'm getting that back. So they just don't know how to walk away from the table. And usually it's an illness, or it's a collapse, or it's a new industry. Do you realize that most of the industry, or most of the companies you buy things from today weren't here a decade ago, right? You know, like the world has turned upside down, and that's happened to the biggest of companies that we could all name in here, right? And yet in little companies, we all have so much confidence. Well, here's an interesting fact. 80% of businesses with less than $50 million of revenue, 80% of them, when put on the market, do not sell. Now, this is not me making up round numbers. These are actually the numbers. Research has proved it out. This is a problem. If I put my business on the market because I want that to happen and it doesn't happen, my reality changes. My thoughts about the future change at that moment. So, and by the way, you might say, well, Mike, I'm running a bigger company. So I can say, we have more than that in revenue. Yeah, even 65% of those don't sell. So if you're above 50 million, 65% of those don't sell. So wait a minute, is that because there's not enough money in the market to buy these businesses? Is that why? Why don't they sell? Think about it. Why don't these companies sell? Why do they get pulled off the market? Is it if there is enough money in the market to buy every business, start with that as an assumption, then why didn't they sell?
They can't agree on terms.
They cannot agree on price and terms. Now, by the way, we have a fun exercise we do in these Vistage groups. We give two people a fact pattern A and a fact pattern B. Same fact pattern. They just don't know it. And we give it to them differently. We give it to one group like they're investment bankers and they're going to buy a business, and we give it to the other group like they built it, and we give them the narrative about how they built it in the community and they had so many great relationships and all this stuff, and they had the best 10 businesses in the area that were all their customers. And then over here we say, by the way, the 10 companies that are their best customers are 80% of the revenue, and we give them all the facts of the same company. We just separate it into what each person would care about. We ask them to go back and say, you guys figure out how much you would buy this company for. You guys figure out how much you'd sell it for. The fact pattern we give them almost always gets this group to come back and say they want to sell it for $7 million, and this group goes, we wouldn't buy it unless it was an earn-out, $1 million up front, with they have to stay in the business and prove that the accounts transfer. $1 million to $7 million, off the market. Because if I can't agree, I can't sell. So, most of the time, business owners don't look at the value of their company until they think they're ready to sell. They don't do any of the planning to sell their business until they think they're in the mindset to sell. The time to do the planning around your business is before you go another year in business. In my world, okay, so you know I'm a private pilot. As a private pilot, you don't go full power and then pick up the charts and figure out where you want to go, right? Not very smart. You could be burning a lot of fuel, a lot of time, a lot of wasted energy going the wrong direction. So you plan where you're going to go first, right? All right. So what we want to see happen, if this little opportunity here doesn't occur and this only happens for 20% of the people, what happens to the other 80%? Well, now their income has to get adjusted, right? So let's move on to sufficiency issues. I'm going to jam through this a little bit. Here's our business owner, and here's what we want to see different. We want to help every business owner we serve find those moments of what we would call either an inefficiency that we can fix, or we want to teach you to capture good EBITDA when it occurs. Because here's what we tend to see happen with everybody around EBITDA. Earnings before income tax, depreciation, and adjustments. EBITDA is the language your accountant or your MBA or your private equity person would tell you to pay attention to. Maybe many of you pay attention to your EBITDA. You should be tracking it. But in those good EBITDA years, you want to get that money off the business balance sheet and onto your personal balance sheet. If you don't, you've all done this. How many of you think about almost every business that sells something to your company? It's one of the things they always include is this will save you money. Well, if it would save me money every time I did one of those transactions, I should have a ton, right, off the balance sheet. It's like Groupon stuff. I saved $50. Did you buy an asset with it? Because I'm not buying it if you didn't buy an asset with it. You know, that's not a savings, that's a discount, right? A savings is if I took the money and moved it into an asset. That's my definition of saving. I took the cash and I bought an asset. If you didn't do that, you probably did not move it toward your sufficiency. So as years go along, I know not every year is a good EBITDA year. So you hold ground. You're so good back there. She's back there giving me a little time. Saying, I just can't tell if 10 means that's how much time I have left or how much I'm over. Whatever. You got to really pound it through with people like me. That's good. All right, so it might look like that. It might look like it wasn't a very good year this year. Hold tight, wait for next year, do the things you normally do. There's no part of me that's unrealistic about this because I too am a business owner. And some years are really good and some years you're doubling down and going for growth, right? All right, but I'm going to give you a few practical ideas for those of you that are business owners here. And by the way, the perfect place to be is selling your business after you've passed the sufficiency curve. May you all pass the sufficiency curve in the next 5 years and work another 30. I could care less. I only care that no one could make you feel terrible about your business because they say it's not worth that much and you're thinking, oh my gosh, how will I retire if I sell it for that? That's like a really bad place to be. Okay? And by the way, the time they find that out is when they get into the discussion with somebody about selling the business, and it insults the heck out of them. I mean, if you know anybody or if you've done it, if you've ever tried to sell a business and somebody steps in and tells you what they'd pay, you think that's their negotiating strategy and they're insulting you to work you down. No, they're really, that's just what they would pay, right? And that's very discouraging. All right, so let's move on. So make it real clear. I have a business balance sheet. I want to move money to my personal balance sheet. And by the way, it's a good test for you as a business owner because I know, like you, I've done it. I leave money on the business balance. In fact, when I do seminars for CEOs, I go, at the end of a good EBITDA year, do you take all the money out of the company and go buy assets, or do you bonus out just enough to pay the tax? What do you think they all say? And I could ask in here, but I'll leave that to your own thought. They generally leave the money in the business, they bonus out enough to pay the tax, right? Because they're S-corps or LLCs that pass through entities. And I'm sorry for those of you that are not business owners that I'm doing business speak, but it's what I do. So if you're a pass-through entity and that money is dropping the tax responsibility is dropping down to your personal balance sheet, you may not want to pay it from there, so you bonus out enough of the surplus cash in the business to pay the tax, and you let the rest ride. Okay? So what we're just going to try to do is if you're going to pay tax on it anyway, we encourage you to move it to your personal balance sheet and loan it back to your company. Why? Why would we say that? It's not a tax play, obviously. Well, not obviously. It's not a tax play. The reason it's about keeping score. Because then you're going to charge yourself interest back to your company and you become the lender. And if the business can't support the payment to you, then it's really not a loan. Just like if you left it in there, it's not really an investment if you didn't get a good ROI. But you don't keep track if you leave it in there. You don't keep track and say, did I get a good ROI on my money? You just let it ride. And so it gets all blended up in the blender of business and you don't pay attention to whether or not it worked. But if you force it to pay you interest, you'll keep score. Okay? All right. And ultimately, if I had anything to say about it, we would not only move it to your personal balance sheet, we would actually move it to a protected balance sheet. Because protected from a lot of things, creditors, unnecessary taxes, generational shifts, all of those things. Ultimately, moving from the riskiest balance sheet to a less risky balance sheet to the lowest risk balance sheet. Make sense? All right. So, new efficiencies and coordinated asset theory. Generally speaking, what I see frequently, and I'll get into where we're going to find these efficiencies, is when people do asset allocation. Have you ever noticed that asset allocation is only on the assets they're offering to manage? Really? Like, is it the only assets I have are the ones in your 401k? Those are it? That's why I got a little pie? All for that? What about the house? What about the buildings I own? Where do those fit in my asset allocation model? Well, that person doesn't do that. So it is individual theory. It's individual asset theory. Now, the problem with that is that's how solutions come about, too. They are not holistic. So in our industry, we walk in all the time, and we can tell by your financial position and what assets you have, we can tell who was there. I can tell whether or not, if somebody set up a certain kind of trust for you. I know what they were focused on. A great example, I'll give you a great example here in a minute when we go through one of the efficiencies. So there's a lot of places to look for efficiencies. The one that no one ever seems to be offended by is, as long as I can prove that we're being not crazy, if we can find money that you shouldn't have had to pay in tax, and we can pull that money back onto your business balance sheet, we like to say, especially when we work with bigger accounts, we'll say, well, we understand you got a team you love, you trust them, we're not trying to mess that up, but if in fact our team can find efficiencies that you're currently losing the money, right? If it's leaving your business balance sheet and it's not coming back, if we can find that money, could we manage that? Usually they give us that because they didn't have it anyway. So let's talk about that. We're going to look at different ways to find money and cash flow. Now here's one on qualified plans. It's interesting that when I look at qualified plans, the average business owner put the qualified plan in place on a particular date when they were getting a certain kind of pressure, like an idea that, hey, the employees really need this. And somebody says, hey, this is a good idea. There's somebody walked in their door and said, hey, you could save a couple bucks in taxes. Or they were like, I want to be a good employer. You probably care about your employees. And I do. So it's very interesting. Those of you that know something about qualified plans, we have a defined benefit plan, and people join our firm and they get upset to hear that it's a defined benefit plan because they want that 401k. If you know anything about those two sides of the pendulum, like the defined benefit is so far better for them, so we do both. Now, I got to tell you, they think their money should go in that 401k because that's where all the talking heads on TV have told them. It's absolutely crazy. So, either way, here's two partners. They have a maximum, I can't use that laser. Two partners, maximum limited at that time, $33,000 based on their configuration. What we're going to look for is another $159 to $191 that we could get off the business balance sheet and onto their personal balance sheet. So here's their current 401k with a basic match and preferreds. The preferred position is the key, like the owners. They wanted to see how much could go to them. So here, they were currently getting about $66,000 out of the plan, out of 85 paid in, so they were doing pretty good, 78%. I mean, can't ask for much better than that. Same fact pattern. They take those same 4 employees, we add a profit sharing element to it, and now we were able to get up to $124,000 into that plan and $115,000 of it going to the owners just by stacking them and taking a different safe harbor. I'm not going to bore you with all of this. The idea being it was the same company, but by modifying the plan design, we're able to increase the window by changing which safe harbor we use. Most of the time, clients don't even know that they just know that they have discrimination testing, but they don't know whether or not they've used a safe harbor. Safe harbor just means if you follow these rules, you get this benefit and the IRS won't beat you up. right? So that's way simplified for any of you accountants in the room, sorry. So, but trust me, I'm happy to go deep if you want to, but just not for the purpose of this meeting. Look at this though, same plan. Total plan contribution, $730,000, $437,000 of the, and by the way, this is just on the portion, 417, this is the key owner contribution, 520, 417 making it to their own accounts. That's a lot more than $33,000 a person for the key owners. It's the same fact pattern. The issue is knowing which safe harbor to use. But usually when people put it in place, they put it in place at a particular time with a certain set of concerns, like I want to take good care of my employees, and they never revisit it. So they go on experiencing the same inefficiency every year. Let's look at another one. So voluntary benefits. Educated employees will save employers money. An educated employee may choose to do an HSA, for example. If they did do an HSA, health savings account, they get to use that money before it gets taxed for all the things they normally pay for in the way of prescriptions and emergency visits and things like that. So in a company of 100 employees, I don't know how many most of you have, we're able to take a small group. If we get 25 people to elect their HSA, that saves another $12,000 a year of recapture for the business owner without doing any, it didn't take it from the employees. In fact, it helped the employees. Now, $12,000, you might say that's not enough. Our job is to find a whole bunch of line items where we can save them money and let them choose. It's not our job to decide for the business owner which ones are going to make sense. But why let money go out the door just because you didn't educate your employees? Like, it was good for them and it's good for you. Another one, here, by the way, I'll make some money for somebody in the room probably, because my guess is in this room are business owners or non-business owners who have investment real estate, right? So you might have a lot of the people I serve, they have real estate that their business operates out of, right? So would it surprise you if it turned out that instead of doing the 39-year depreciation on your piece of property, I just bought a new building recently, and I'm in my 50s, 39-year depreciation. Think about that. So the 39th year may not be as valuable to me as this year. So would it be surprising to know that the IRS absolutely allows, this is not even something you have to refile old tax returns for. So let me say that again. You don't even have to file old tax returns and amend them. You can just file this year and add one document to it as long as you have an engineer do the research. Cost a couple grand. And by the way, so when I ask people if they've done it, they say, my CPA does it. That means they didn't do it, because it had to be somebody that's in the engineering space that could do it. They're the ones who have to certify the report. So if it turns out that I get an engineer to tell me about this building, they will tell me that this house may be here in 39 years, but maybe you'll change the floors or the fixtures or the carpet and the paint. Those things probably don't last 39 years. So you can put those in a 5-year bucket or a 7-year bucket or a 15-year bucket. And when you do, you can take the depreciation now. So what does that look like? Well, in my case, on one little building, and it was just a little office building, saved me $149,000 in the first 5 years. Here's what happens. I took a little less depreciation in the future and got to take a lot more now. That's my cash flow. You can see the red and the green here, right? This is the scheduled default. By the way, there's a lot of things in the tax code that are pure default, meaning if you don't do the planning, if you don't take the time to plan, you will pay an unnecessary tax. It is not because somebody wasn't aggressive enough or too conservative or whatever. It's just that if you didn't take the time to plan, you probably paid an unnecessary tax. That's how it works. Because the default is there for people that don't plan, and they have to do it generally over a lot of people, right? All right. So here's a big one, guys, huge. And I know I've got to wrap up. So where are we at? I'm over? You gave up on me? All right. You never mind. So this one's a big one. This one's a big one because this actually, anybody in the professional side of advice in our industry in this room other than just you? Anybody else? All right. When the IRS, you are? Yeah. What? Oh, you're with Guardian. Sorry, I knew that. So when the IRS gets upset about an abuse, in the market. They will then start to put things on the dirty dozen list. So what I'm going to share with you a year ago was on the IRS's dirty dozen list. By the way, along with the technique I'm going to show you, so was charity and something called grantor trusts. Dirty dozen means they see that these are the top places that professional advisors are leading people into abusive practices. Abuse meaning defying the spirit of it. And I think it's important to point that out because there is absolutely a community of people that will try to run on dirt roads, right? They'll say, hey, nobody's told you about this, and they'll run out there and take you down some idea that should work. And you really should be careful of those people. But I'm telling you, there is this particular area is something that's been around for 30 years, and yet only in the last decade has it become popular for small business owners. Now, there's a lot of reasons for that. Let's first start talking about why this occurs, because this one is a very big deduction that's really good for wealth building. So this is a tax deduction issue for wealth building. And if I get to the end of my year and I have a nice EBITDA year and I leave that money in the company, there's only two reasons to leave money in your company. Unless you're just feeling, what's that? Unless you're feeling like you just don't know what to do with it, there's only two reasons to leave cash on the balance sheet. You're either trying to grow and you're leaving it there for the sake of the investment you're going to make next year in your business, or you're trying to protect your company in case it's a bad year. Sounds prudent, right? It makes sense to protect your own company. And so we leave a cushion on the balance sheet. We bonus out the tax, and we leave a cushion there because you just don't know how next year is going to go. Well, for 30 years, we have had a rule that allows us to, as long as we will memorialize the commitment that that money is to protect us, we can move that money into a small, I know it's going to sound crazy, your own insurance company. The only thing is until recently, the cost of administration meant you needed to have millions a year. Anybody ever walk into an electronics store, you buy an electronic, and at the end of the transaction, they ask you if you want to buy what? Protection plan, right? Do you think that they're offering you one made by somebody else, or is it their own? They have to file it, and it is their own insurance company. So Best Buy, it's their insurance company. And the auto dealer you bought your car from, that warranty is with their own insurance company usually. It's called a captive insurance company, meaning that I own it, and it's for the sake of protecting my companies, right? So it turns out that there's a special provision in the code for small insurance companies and small companies. So under Section 831B, up until right now, every year I can take a tax deduction for paying up to $1.2 million in premium out of my company into a company that is protecting my company that I own. Think about that. I don't have to match it. I don't have to match it for anybody. I don't have to make it, it's not an employee benefit. It's not subject to ERISA. It is $1.2 million right now that can go off my business balance sheet with an income tax deduction, ordinary deduction, and go into a captive insurance company that I own, and it does not produce tax recognition when I put it in that insurance company because it's reserving to protect me. What's interesting is this came under attack last year because so many small businesses and medium-sized businesses started doing it. That's a lot of money. That's a lot of flexibility, right? And you get to make the decision at the end of the year after you decide whether it was a good year or a bad year. And you don't have to make a promise up front. But boy, the service was going, and a lot of CPAs who had not seen these grow up inside the small business community went, be careful. And they're right to be careful because there were people abusing it. So the IRS decided to get upset with this because they saw some abuse. Now, there's an expression we all have, bad facts make for bad law, right? What happened was people were going out there trying to create the perfect insurance company that would never have a claim. So the ones that the IRS chooses to pick on, they made poster children of, a Kansas business owner who took out tsunami insurance on his business. Now, of course, if he had been in Virginia, maybe it'd be a different, sorry, that was this morning's news. So, but the tsunami insurance was really abusive, right? And there were a whole bunch of those kinds of things. So the IRS decided to come target those people that weren't actually running it like an insurance company. But if you were working with people that ran it like an insurance company, that just meant you were going to be conservative with the assets and you were actually going to protect yourself against real risk. Let me tell you, as a small business owner, you have a bunch of risk you cannot insure for currently. As a human being, I'll give you an example. But, by the way, insurance companies don't make an offer to insure you from something that is very likely to be really expensive and highly likely, right? So they don't want those risks. I'll give you an example. There is no current market for divorce insurance, right? There is no current market for success insurance. But what there is the capability of you building a market for, and by the way, like in some of the states that we use, Tennessee and Vermont, and Delaware, I mean, they have 46 definitions of business interruption. Now, I can think of a lot of business interruptions that matter to every one of us. And if we insure ourselves against those specific types of business interruption, meaning we do want that money if it happens, well, that's logical. Of course we do. If that's true, then we can take that money, put it out. We have to have outside actuaries, outside administrators, but it used to be so expensive. Today, you can run your own insurance company for less than you would probably pay one employee of average capability. About $50,000 a year, you can run an insurance company that you own. And I'm not being mean about the average capability. It depends on what city you're in, I suppose. But the $50,000 a year, I can run my own insurance company because all the services necessary to run my insurance company are provided by third-party sources who are competitive with one another. And therefore, the prices have come down, 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 because now there's more of them in the market, right? So what's really amazing about this, the IRS decided to attack for abuse, and everybody held their breath like, uh-oh, what does this mean? I have a captive insurance company. So what did it mean? They came back and said, yeah, no more of that stuff in Kansas. And they really didn't love the idea that people were doing the risk share model to get huge amounts of wealth to their kids without a transfer tax, even though it still can, but they put a condition on it. And that was it. But guess what else they did? They had the ability to kill it, modify it. They modified it and made it better. So starting in 2017, I can put $2.2 million a year in it. That's a statement of belief, because in a time like today, they could have made it go down and they gave me more room if you're an honest business owner. You just have to do it correctly, right? That's a huge deal. So for those of you that are trying to figure out how to save money and catch up to that curve, you have a couple of good years. You can now start to protect your business in case you don't have another good year and get that money off one balance sheet onto if you set that insurance company up correctly, you'd set it up in an asset protection trust so that it's completely separate from the risks of your business. It just insures them, right? By the way, after 1 year, if the risk didn't occur, all the money I just moved off the balance sheet drops down to profit for that insurance company. Guess what the IRS allows you to do about that? If you're a small company with a small captive insurance company, as long as your annual contribution is below that limit, 1.2 right now, 2.2 next year, as long as you're below that, when it drops to profit, it is not a taxable event to that company. Because they're allowing the little company to catch up to the bigger companies who have bigger reserve rules, and they follow them, but they take huge capital investments. So the only thing your company has to pay tax on annually then is the earnings on your surplus in that company. So $1.2 million goes in, or $500,000, or maybe you start yours with $100,000, but you're chopping it away, right? And there's rules, and I can explain all that, but for today, what you understand is that you're protecting your company, but if it didn't need to be protected that year, it drops to the balance sheet, and it is no longer at risk, and it's now saved, and you can turn that into an investment company, and that's its purpose, because insurance companies are, in fact, when they're not whatever's not reserving against a risk is invested then in the market to help the company be bigger, right? This is a great wealth building strategy for you as a business owner. Yes?
Is it only available for a owned business, or could a W-2 person also take advantage of that?
Great question, and a simple answer. It must be a business owner. Sorry. That's why they don't invite me to things that don't have business owners. Sorry. But it's a good opportunity to think about starting a business. All right. By the way, this finally came out in the Journal of Accountancy, and that was great. Look at this difference. So if I take I don't have a captive insurance company, 1 year, 5 years, 10 years, if I just held on to the money, paid an average of 45% state and federal, of course you live in Texas, so I'm jealous, but I live in California, the highest tax state in the land. So mine's not even this good. So if I pay the tax and leave it building, I've got about 6.9 total after tax investment. That's the loss, right? Excuse me, that's the total after 10 years, as opposed to 11 million that I would have had in my captive if I could only do the $1.2 million a year. And that was assuming what for total cost of operation? Probably about, looking at the operating expenses, $65,000 a year. So it's making an assumption of about $65,000 a year. That's lower now, right? So that's pretty cool. And that's wealth building, and there's nobody else involved but you, the owner. All right. Business credit and on surplus assets. It's interesting, if you're a business owner, you go out to your bank, you ask them for a loan because you're going to grow, and they start to do something called purpose lending. And they start to analyze your balance sheet and your cash flow statement, and they put all of your material, all of your tax returns and your balance sheet and everything into something called the Unified Credit Analysis process. Anybody familiar with that? No, you're not. And the reason you're not is because it's on their side of the table. Your lender, not being mean, they are not on your side of the table. They may be your friend, you might go to lunch, but they are not on your side of the table. They're on the other side of the table. They are supposed to make profit for the bank. So they get to use their unified credit analysis to sit on their side of the table and look at all the areas you may not be as good as your peer group, and that way they can negotiate the rate with you and tell you how many times a year they will audit whether or not you're staying on purpose. You go through the whole underwriting process on that effort. And at the very end, when they're ready to make the loan and you're ready to get it because you've made a bunch of promises and you were going to do things, they make you sign something. What is it they make you sign? I hear it. Personal guarantee. Okay, the PG. I mean, it's actually so common that you just assume it, like I have to sign one. All right, I'm there. So, just had to give them the last idea. So this one is interesting. It turns out that if you have money in investments, you're already making promises to, if you have money in investments in there at your broker-dealer or wherever, let's say the Bank of New York or something, they will allow you to take a loan, a non-purpose loan, I don't mean a margin account, a non-purpose loan for the sake of your business or anything else, and they will only let your assets be the collateral, and you will not have to sign any PG. And what's interesting, though, the minute you sign a PG, even though you didn't want to get your securities involved, the second you sign it, they're all involved. In fact, anybody that had to make a recovery on that promise to pay would immediately go after your securities account because it's the easiest one to liquidate. So your securities are already getting leveraged if you sign a PG with your bank. So if you have assets in an investment account, use the broker-dealer, if they can do it, to do a non-purpose loan. Then they don't audit you. They don't make you explain what you did with it. They charge you less interest. And by the way, if you borrow from the bank, they make you pay interest on the money you used and the money they promised you could use, even if you didn't use it. Serious, that's for sure. And then if you do it with your investment or your broker-dealer, it's like having a home equity line. You only pay interest on what you actually borrow, right? All right. I'm going to have to wrap this up. So look at that. Highest stakes, efficiency curve. We covered most of it, not well. Here's a little something we do for our consulting clients. We have an investment banking team that we work with that we have take all the same information we gather for them when we're looking for tax efficiencies, and we have them produce a report that says, how's this business owner doing from all the areas that I'm not the specialist of? I do tax efficiencies and financial efficiencies. They come in and look about whether or not they buy it. This is an important process. There are 3 people out there that want to know what your business looks like other than your financial advisor. Your bank, if they're going to loan money to you, an investment banker, if they're going to help you grow to sell your company, and a private equity firm. Private equity firms are the ones that will come along if you're a private business, and they will invest in your business with you so that you can grow. But the other thing to recognize about the private equity team and your bank is that they take all that analysis to their side of the table. If a private equity company wants to invest in you, they not only see growth, they see inefficiencies in certain areas of your business that they know if they were in there, you wouldn't be inefficient there. And they want that arbitrage on their side of the table. So we've had this firm take a look at all the places you could find efficiency that are not pure tax efficiencies, and we asked them to do a comprehensive report every year for our business owners to help them figure out, how am I doing on my cash management? Are my receivables up or down compared to my peer group, compared to last year, year over year, and that kind of thing? Inventory, payables, productivity, operating expenses, and give us real ideas and generate a report. So these reports come out, and they give us an annual valuation for every business we serve, plus their cost of goods sold, their CapEx strategies, and we are now adding a sufficiency curve for our business owner because it's a little more complicated, right? Like where are they at in the sufficiency curve as it relates to their business? And then also the one other thing we throw into this, we do the unified credit analysis for you and give it to you so that you are never on the other side of the table of your own information. This way you can compare where you're strong and where you're weak before somebody else does it for you for the reason that they care about. So Christine has asked me to let you guys know that those that are in her Power Collective, that she's going to have our firm do that for them every year as one of the deliverables out of the dues you pay. So that's currently the offer, and I think the other thing that you'll hear about in a breakout session from Jason is a little bit about our living balance sheet. This will be a gift for you so that you can keep track on a personal level of everything you get off the business balance sheet and keep a holistic approach to paying attention to your money. I'll leave all this to later, but it covers the protection. It covers all the domains that work together so that you are never isolating your focus into just one area. And this is a live tool that tracks all of your assets at the same time and updates them daily. By the way, includes the tax liability of any of your assets that have a tax liability that's reported, and the vault, and that's about it. I'll leave that off so that we can end. And there's a disclosure in case you need one. I'm happy to stick around till, wait, what time is it? I'm happy to leave. It's 1:50, so.
Should I tell y'all he's amazing? Thank you.
Absolutely.
Oh,
Great seeing
appreciate
you.
it. And he flew in, where'd you fly in from?
Yesterday I was in the Carolinas and
And then before that?
Bahamas.
He just came in from his vacation. He made a quick